All right, panel. So after watching Bellator 300, their main event, I had nostalgia. You see, the same way we used to talk about Bellator lightweight champs, uh, Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler, WEC champions like Benson Henderson and Anthony Pettis, Strikeforce champions like Gilbert Melendez and Josh Thompson. I just think it's fair to say Usman Nurmagomedov is one of the best lightweights in the world and could be a UFC champion. This will get shut down by UFC fans and embraced by hardcore MMA fans. But all those names I threw out, I mean, kind of helps my case here. What do you guys think, though? No one cares what I think. It's the panel. You guys are the stars. What do you guys think about Bellator's Nurmi, Usman Nurmagomedov? All right, leading off this week is Mike Vaughn.
I mean, if you've been watching MMA long enough, and it doesn't matter about promotional lines or whatever you think, and you actually can just judge a fighter based off their talent in the cage, it's clear Usman Nurmagomedov is extremely good at fighting. Given his age, given his experience, all this stuff, he's way ahead of the curve. He's really, really good, and honestly might be the best of the Nurmagomedov bunch. I know that's a bold statement to make, given the success Khabib had and other members of that family. Forever, you kind of hear like it might be Umar Nurmagomedov. That's what you would hear from people around the camp, people from AKA, and things like that. But Umar's been slowed a little bit by injuries and just time off and not being able to get the big fights. They tried with Corey Sandhagen, but they couldn't get that fight for him. Obviously, he pulled out. And we're seeing with Usman, who's able to be more consistent and fight some fairly high-level guys. I know you can poke holes saying, Brent Primus is maybe on the back end. Benson Henderson is maybe on the back end of his career, obviously retired now. Maybe isn't fighting like the cream of the crop, but I think we're going to get this in the finals of the Grand Prix, no matter who he fights. And then, maybe fights an AJ McKee or people like that after. There's going to be people that allow him to continue building up this resume and these credentials and ones that you can maybe rival. I know it's hard to say who the best lightweight is because the UFC champion is Islam Makhachev, who's his teammate and his good friend and someone who he will never fight, even if he did come to the UFC. So you'd maybe never know if those two guys continue to dominate what it would look like. But you look at some of those other matchups, Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, etc. Like I just envision those fights in my mind, and I don't think it would be a blowout by any stretch. It's clear Usman is extremely talented. His fight IQ is off the charts. His kicking game is sensational. And at only 25 years old, the sky is absolutely the limit for him. I'm really curious to see how far he can take this undefeated run.
Yeah, Mike, perfectly said. And on top of all that, even his coach, Javier Mendez, says he's the best one I've ever had. Not just of the Dagestani fighters, the Nurmagomedovs. I mean, he's throwing in Kane, Rockhold, Cormier, like really, really some high praise. Father, what are your thoughts here on Usman Nurmagomedov? Well-rounded, looked great, another title defense for him. But again, does he register as one of the greats really on this planet?
I mean, it's hard to put the great label on him just because he's so young in his career, but has he lived up to expectations? Absolutely, and some. I mean, he's dominated so far. He's been exactly who people are touting him to be with these shutout performances. Like Mike said, I know he's fighting guys that are perhaps on the tail end of their career, but anyone who's been put in front of him, he's made it look easy and made it look very impressive. Has gone the distance, shown us that he can go the championship rounds with ease. So the future is absolutely bright for him, and those step ups will come. They'll come in the Grand Prix finale. They'll come down the line. But has he lived up to the potential? Absolutely, and some. And I would not be surprised if we're talking about him as one of the greatest lightweights of all time in a couple of years. It's just hard right now based off of the competition he's had. But every time the competition has gotten tougher, he's still continued to make it look easy. So definitely a very bright future for him.
No doubt. 18-0, 14 finishes, 8 by TKO, KO, and 6 by submission. I mean, a balanced attack. This guy is really a nightmare. Goes, how about you, man? What are your thoughts? Are we going overboard here, or do you think is this unanimous? Do you think this guy's really as good as they say?
I think when it comes to MMA, we all tend to go a little overboard. But in this case, I mean, his coaches say it, right? They give him high praises. His teammates give him high praises. when you see him fight, the thing that stands out the most for me is the look on his face. He has the same look that we would have if we were waiting for our coffee at Starbucks or something. He's absolutely unfazed by his opponents. He never gets intimidated. He never backs down. Nothing just seems to bother him at all. And he can take the fight wherever he wants, whether he wants it on the ground, whether he wants it standing. He can just take advantage of his opponents. Now, the problem is this, like, you want to look at a guy that's successful and try and find some kind of weaknesses. There really aren't that. The only thing that I can think of is in the UFC, he would be able to compete, no doubt. But in the UFC, you're not just fighting your opponent, you're kind of fighting the pressures of being a champion, being on the biggest stage. You're fighting that schedule, right? You have to be active, and every single fighter you fight is an absolute killer, especially in that division. If you look at guys like Chandler, Gagey, Alvarez, they've all had their stumbles, right? They didn't just come out of the gate and start wrecking shop in the UFC. Eventually they settled in, but all three of them have kind of talked about how different it was for them. And we won't really know that from him until we see him in that sort of situation. I see a similar path for Nurmagomedov. If he were to go to the UFC, I think he would be very successful, but I do think it might come with a stumble at the beginning or something. But eventually I think he would get it done. He's just way too talented, man. I really like this kid.
Me too. I'd like to see it one day. Who knows if we ever will, but I want to ask you guys a quick follow-up.
To kind of add to it, though, George, like I think he's being perfectly positioned for success, right? Like you could argue his Bellator title shot was not really deserved. They kind of shoehorned him in there a little bit too early, but that's one of the great benefits of being a Bellator, right? Like you could do something like that with much less outrage, and he was right in there, and like he's already building up these experiences. This is like his third, fourth title fight already. It's only going to be beneficial. He's going these 5-rounders. He's not really getting pushed. The pressures Go spoke to. I mean, what's more pressure than him coming in as the champion to a Grand Prix semifinals? He not only has like the belt to lose, he's got that $1 million spot in the tournament final to lose as well. So he is dealing with pretty high stakes situations here and high pressure situations, and he's seemingly going through them pretty well. I mean, if you wanted to make a criticism, I guess you could say like this wasn't the most entertaining fight in the world. I don't think it lived up to like Bellator 300 expectations, right? If you can even match those given the magnitude of the show. So if you wanted to criticize him like a little bit there, but given all those things we just said, and you can throw heat on Brent Primus too, being like when you were clearly down 3 rounds, 4 rounds, you weren't going for it or taking any major risks. So he didn't force Usman to go to first, second gear there. And that's why I want to see him fight better guys that can actually push him, and we can see him go a little bit deeper into his bag, because he did not even look like he was in a fight after going 5 rounds on Saturday.
I just think the pressures are different. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
If you play in the national championship in football, there's pressure, but it don't match up to the Super Bowl. All the media you got to do, all the other things surrounding, people spitting on you from the opposing teams. It gets nuts, man. I just feel like it's a little different, but if that family has shown anything, it's that they can kind of put that to the side. Now, sometimes you would see Khabib. He's gotten heated before. You can get to him, but in the actual fight, I don't know what they do. They just flip a switch. They tone it down.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I'm just saying I think he's being positioned well for if that day does come. He'll have the experience in title fights. I'm sure he's cornered Islam and Khabib and been around these situations before. So, like, obviously you never know until you're in there how you're 100% going to deal with it. But the foundation's there for him to at least hopefully thrive in that situation if he's ever there.
I just thought of something, guys. Was that the beginning of the Dylan Dennis that we know now? You know, this villain guy that's just out there, whether he's in a fight or not, or wasn't it him getting on Khabib's nerves? And Khabib went over and socked him up or whatever. I mean, it's pretty interesting because Dennis, you know, has blown up in a way without fighting, and that might have been the start of it. I had a quick follow-up for you guys. I got lambasted on Junkie's Instagram feed. I mean, not too bad, but I simply stated I thought Cyborg and Cat should have been the main event. No disrespect to Usman. I mean, we're obviously having this topic. But I just felt like that's where the buzz was. She used to live in San Diego, did Cyborg. She's an iconic figure in the sport, and that heat that they had, right? And Kat lives in San Diego too. Whereas Usman and Primus, as far as I know, was pretty respectful. But what do you guys think of this? Like I said, everyone told me everyone showed up for Usman. Of course, you got some idiots out there. No one cares about women's MMA, but I still felt like that was the fight. What do you guys think?
Okay. I mean, Cyborg is definitely worthy of headlining a massive show, but I think what Bellator pride themselves in is building young talent. It's something that Scott Coker talks about all the time, building them from the ground up. So I think they obviously see something in Usman and giving him that type of platform. He has the fan base, he has the skill set. So I don't hate it, but I also wouldn't have hated if Chris Cyborg headlined just because she's obviously one of the greatest fighters of all time, regardless of gender. So I see people kind of defending Usman's spot, but like I said, Bellator, Scott Coker, they pride themselves in building young talent, and they were giving him a big spot because they obviously see something very big in him.
Yeah, I feel like that's the perfect answer. If like, what is Bellator building towards, I guess, is the only question, right? Like, we don't even know if there's going to be a Bellator. So that's the only thing that puzzles me. I mean, if there was like a future here, be like, yeah, that makes total sense. Without knowing that, I do feel like Cyborg was probably the right move, just given her career cachet, the fact that it's probably a more reliably entertaining fight, which obviously it was, and her being the only champion to finish it quickly out of that sense. But yeah, I understand why they do that. The Nurmagomedov name is still very appealing in MMA, regardless of who it is, and to slap it on Bellator 300 is clearly like a smart business move in a sense too. But I don't think Cyborg would have been bad either, especially given Scott Coker's ties to women's MMA and the fact that's always been something kind of unique that he is pushing the promoter. So I would have been fine with either. Obviously, in hindsight, Cyborg would have been the right choice given the entertainment value of her fight compared to Usman.
Yeah, I did have one defender in there who said that he or she was there, and that the place did clear out a little bit after Cyborg. But by then, I had been buried by all the Nurmi fans. No biggie. All right. Just wanted to run it by you guys. Here's something good coming out of the chat. And folks, if you give me something good out of the chat, a question, a comment, I'll shoot it to the panel or take it myself. So let's make them some good ones. Benny says, why was AJ out of the tournament? And you're right. So that was a semifinal, the Primus and Nurmagomedov fight. Nurmagomedov advances to the Grand Prix, like Mike pointed out. And Shabali faces Patricky Pitbull in Chicago at Bellator 301. The winner will face Usman Nurmagomedov. Why was AJ out? I believe it was a staph, right, guys? He had a staph skin issue or something like that. So he's out, but he's been pointed as the sub should something happen to anyone else, because obviously that's cleared up. It wasn't a major injury, and he fights Sydney Outlaw at Bellator 301. Sorry. So if something were to happen to the winner or any of them that's left, then you'll see him step in. He also says, who's Usman's first fight if he was to go to the UFC? That's a good one. Let's entertain that. Can you guys think of who you would give him if he were to go to the UFC, like let's say Bellator did, and cease operations?
Man, anyone in that top 10 would be awesome. I'd be fine with, but like, I guess if you want a specific name, I mean, how about like Arman Sarukian would be a lot of fun, or Zeev when he's back. I guess it depends on the time.
That's a good one too. Yeah,
actually happen, but anyone in there would be money and super interesting challenge. So I'm here for it.